meeting of Governance Committee. The meeting today will be open to the public and it will be webcast, and the recording will be available later for people to view through the Council's website. It's also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. The agenda and reports for today's meeting are available on the Council website and on the Modern Gov app. Paper copies are available if you don't have them already. Just request that mobile telephones, other such equipment are switched off or to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting, and to explain there is no fire test planned for today, so if there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from Town Hall staff. We'll go around and ask members to introduce themselves, particularly welcome to the new members of the committee. My name is Fran Belbin. I'm Councillor for Firth Park Ward and Chair of this committee. Go that way.
Councillor Mary Lee, Councillor for Darnell Ward.
Councillor Mark Rustling, Councillor for Shire Green and Brightside.
Councillor Dorndale, Councillor for Shire Green and Brightside.
Paul Turpin, Green Councillor, Gleadus Valley.
Good afternoon, Julie Grocott, Councillor for Stocksbridge, Upperdown Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor for West Ecclesfield Ward, Knightweavery.
Councillor Tim Huggan, Councillor for Crooks and Crossbow.
Councillor Sue Alston, Councillor for Fulwood Ward and Deputy Chair of this committee.
Thank you, and I'll just ask officers to introduce themselves as well.
Good afternoon, I'm James Henderson, Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Alice Nicholson, Policy and Improvement Officer in the Strategy and Partnerships team.
Afternoon, Jason Deach, Head of Democratic Services.
And Amanda Clayton from Democratic Services.
Thanks, everyone. In terms of apologies, we do have apologies for absence from Councillor L. Dodd, and Councillor Dorndale will be substituting for her at this meeting. And if I can, well, we are doing apologise, just apologise as well that quite a lot of the papers for this meeting did come out late. I do know that they were all produced by colleagues in Democratic Services, who I'm sure you'll all appreciate have been extremely busy in recent weeks with the elections, but thank you for getting all those papers out. But I know they have all been put on the website as well, but for those who were looking for them earlier, they were a bit later than usual. Next item is exclusion of the public and press. There are no items that require exclusion at this meeting. So item 4 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? Nope. So we can move straight on to item 5, which was the minutes of the previous meeting. For those who were there, I'm looking in this direction. Can we agree that they were a true record? Thank you. I will just highlight there that a lot of the previous meeting we did spend discussing the new approach to public questions. I think we, again, because of the election, the implementation of that new approach is in process, shall we say, and I know, again, officers have done a lot of work in briefing officers supporting committees and so on about how that process will work, and we are hoping to be able to introduce that new system from September in our policy committees. So we will make sure that public as well as members and officers are fully on board and aware of how that system will work as we introduce it. So thanks to everybody for your patience with that. Item 6 is public questions and petitions for this committee, but we haven't received any for this committee. So we will move on to item 7, which is member role profiles. And Jason, I think you're going to present this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to briefly introduce this paper, the Member Development Working Group has been working on a suite of role profiles for particular roles in the committee system. The first set was approved by Governance Committee in February of this year, and we've been working on a further 4 role profiles, and they are summarised in this report. They're appended to the report. As part of that work, we've done some research with local authorities to benchmark this, Local Government Association and the Institute of Local Government Studies. So really this report today with the appended role profiles is to provide any final comments from the committee on the profiles. Those are the policy subcommittee subcommittee chairs, the health scrutiny chair, local area committee chair, and just any comments on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So, and I think additionally, it was committee chairs that I think that we hadn't considered before, which would include things like admissions committee and some of those, wasn't it? So there's 4 new profiles to consider there in addition to those that we've previously discussed at this committee and approved. Any comments on things that should be added or things that we want to look at in the future? Paul?
Thanks, Fran. This is welcome work, useful stuff to have. I think that we need to be looking at the roles of deputy chairs and if a spokesperson would be relevant to some of those committees, particularly like the local area committee deputy chairs do carry an SRA, and so I think that would be the natural next step to look at those secondary roles.
Thanks, Paul. Julie?
Yeah, I think Paul makes a valid point, and in terms of looking at member development, which of course this committee also has a responsibility for, then I think there's a lot to be said specifically for the role profile regarding whether it carries an SRA or not for the spokesperson, because I think that's quite a pivotal role, particularly for members who may be looking to progress to different roles. So having a role profile that they work to, I think, will be quite helpful.
Thanks. I think some of the work that's been previously done does include, we've already developed role profiles for spokespeople on policy committees and for deputy chairs of those committees, but I think Paul is right. We haven't yet done any work on one for the deputy chairs of LACs. I think the LAC chair is within this one. So some of that work has been done, and I think they're very much with an eye to both making sure that holders of those roles are clear on what they're meant to do, also so that the public are conscious of what they're meant to do and can hold people accountable, but also very much with a view to member development so that people can identify any of those parts of that role that they may want support with, and we'll continue to look at that through the member development working group. Is there any more comments or questions on these? Paul?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure that we've got a role profile with respect for the chair of the governance committee.
I think you're right. And that would also go for the deputy chairs, I think, of governance, charity sub, and so on. I think the generic committee chair one, I think there's something we perhaps need to be a bit specific about. Does that apply to any other committee, or does it apply to perhaps some of those committees that don't have SRAs at the moment, such as admissions, and just be very clear about what is covered by that generic committee chair role profile. Sue?
Yeah, I think I was just about to say more or less what you've said. I think the generic chair role, maybe it could have to include added on, being that list you've already come up with, which certainly would include governance. I don't think we need to keep going on this. We could end up giving a role profile for everything. If people feel strongly that there should be one for the deputy chair of LACs because that is a remunerated position, then I would support that. But I think otherwise, I think we need to sort of draw a line and review them in time, obviously. But I think we could keep going forever if we're not careful.
Thanks, Sue. I think I agree with that point. I think part of the point of this exercise was that there would be something that could be applicable and transferable, because undoubtedly things will, through other work that governance is doing, not least, some of these committees and so on may change, and we don't want us to have to continually provide new role descriptions, but hopefully what we're producing has got enough transferable elements that we can apply them to roles as they change and new roles appear as well, to some extent at least. Jason?
Thanks, Chair. They're really useful comments, thank you. And I think describing what the generic chair role is. It's actually really useful to describe that in a better way. One thing I didn't mention was that the independent remuneration panel will use this as part of their evidence when they look at the members' allowances scheme. So this work is really useful because it feeds into that, as well as describing to new members what the roles are, should they be looking at sort of going into one of those roles in the future time. Thank you.
So,
Thank you. This is just a really simple request, actually, is that when we've got these last ones finished, can we do a bit of a launch among all members, just to signpost them to where they will be and to say that they're all now in place? I think it would just be useful to raise awareness for people who, you know, because they've taken quite a while to gradually all pull together.
thanks, Sue. I think that's a good idea. I'm not seeing any more hands up. Is there anything else you want to add, Jason? Okay, thanks everybody. Can we agree the recommendations here then, which are to review and provide any final comments on the 4 role profiles, to adopt the four role profiles, to request the Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement with the Member Development Working Group to identify priority areas for member development activity arising from them, and to identify any further roles which City Councillors perform, for which role profiles might be developed in the future. I think we've done some of that through the discussion, but in terms of actually adopting these role profiles, are we all happy to take that forward? Thank you, everyone. In that case, we can move on to item 8, which is a review of the Finance Committee remit, and I will pass over to David for this.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do it from up here rather than going down there. This review stems from 3 identified matters in relation to how the Council operates its committee system. The first is matters that have been raised by members of the Finance Committee in relation to their current remit as it stands. That remit at the moment is in relation to looking at the outturn of the in-year budget, but there's no real mechanism within that for it to take any action in relation to that. It sort of receives it as a report. There's also no role in budget setting for the following year. That's a matter for strategy and resources, and it will still be strategy and resources that are approving the final version of the proposed budget to go to full committee for approval. But it was felt that there was a role needed for Finance Committee to add some, for want of a better phrase, or probably is the right phrase, pre-scrutiny to the work that's going on before it goes to Finance Committee, for strategy and resources for that approval. The other matter that has come up is the fact that the strategy and resources on the 22nd of April approved a performance and outcomes framework for the Council, and it needs somewhere for that to be monitored. What we need to do is have an overarching view of performance, and therefore it's felt appropriate that Finance Committee take on that performance monitoring function. So that will include those matters that are going to be reported within the performance framework, the matters of performance in relation to Council's finance, but also any other corporate performance that it's felt that might need to go to Finance Committee, such as how it's operating health and safety wise and things like that. The final matter that was a consideration was the fact that Strategy and Resources was the relevant policy committee for a number of the strategic enabling services, and therefore was taking the policy committee decisions in relation to those. It was felt that that wasn't quite right, because that meant a number of, not only were a number of financial policy matters reserved to finance, reserved to strategy and resources, and therefore not being considered by finance, or not within the remit of Finance Committee, that actually strategy and resources was then considering that the Finance Committee was the appropriate place to consider those, and was referring them on to Finance Committee for consideration. And therefore it's felt that an appropriate way to do that is to make Finance Committee, which currently isn't a policy committee, to make it into a policy committee, and for it to have those strategic enabling services remits within it, and it will make the appropriate decisions that any other policy committee would in relation to that. We have considered whether that will increase the workload on Finance Committee to an extent that's not acceptable, but we don't think that that's likely. Having done a review of the previous year's decisions and looking at those that, whilst they might relate to those strategic enabling services areas, a number of those were cross-cutting and strategic matters that would properly have gone to strategy and resources and will still go to strategy and resources. Looking at taking those that were actually remitted to Finance Committee and those that would now go to Finance Committee, there were only about 10 in the last year that would now move over to Finance Committee. And actually a number of those were commissioning strategies for IT systems. And now that we have the overarching digital strategy that acts as that commissioning strategy, there's likely to be less of those going over the year. So we don't think it's going to cause an issue for Finance Committee in respect of its workload. So the report deals with the changes that are in there for that. The intention is that Finance Committee will have the ability to refer matters on to strategy and resources if it thinks there's a significant issue that needs to be referred to strategy and resources. So the intention is that Finance Committee's role will align with that of strategy and resources rather than taking over that overarching view of performance that strategy and resources takes. It can also refer matters on to other policy committees and will be able to take individual reports in relation to performance matters as well as those that are coming through the performance framework, whether they are general matters or whether they're finance matters. There is a draft of the changes to the Constitution attached to the report, and it is proposed that if Governance Committee approve these changes today, then they will go to full council at its next meeting on the 17th of July for approval so that these can take effect. I think it's probably worth me briefly going through, rather than going through everyone in detail, just to highlight the changes and why they're in and what the effect of those is. So I think it's page 7 of my individual report, I think is it. So it's of the appendix, it's the first page of the appendix. Yes. So the first changes are just to effectively change the Constitution where it refers to policy committees and just to include that and make it clear that it's included that Finance Committee is one. The rest of it, there's no changes until you get to, no substantive changes until you get to Strategy and Resources Committee, which again are just some consequential changes to take account of the fact that the Finance Committee is now a policy committee, so we now no longer need to refer to the chair of Finance Committee being a member of S&R because they are a chair of a policy committee, so it's included there. The corporate responsibilities of S&R don't change, except there's a clarification that there is a matter there that is now reserved to finance and performance, as we're probably going to call it, and therefore that's carved out. And then the council functions are deleted from there. The next page are just some consequential changes for tidying up. And then we get on to Finance and Performance Policy Committee itself. The first pages, the first changes, are actually those matters that are in all policy committees. So that's a copy and the same matters as are in other policy committees. So just to make it clear that it has all those matters, the same as any other policy committee. The final paragraph on that page says the committee may refer matters to Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, but to no other policy committee. That relates only to those issues that are within its own remit as a as a policy committee for those work areas, the ability to refer is later on, and I will refer to that just in case anybody had seen that and thought it was an anomaly with the intention. So then we get down to the main changes, which are performance. So it is to receive and consider reviews of service, financial and corporate performance. So that will include both the corporate performance framework and also any other specific performance, but particularly financial and in-year financial issues, and any in relation to budget savings. Those can be those reviews on those performance matters. It's then got an ability to refer performance matters to the relevant policy committee, and it will notify strategy and resources if it does, and escalating significant concerns to strategy and resources policy committee for consideration. It doesn't have any details of how they will be considered, but the anticipation will be that they will then appear on the agenda of the policy committee that will consider it, and a report will then go back to finance committee on any action that it's proposing to take. So then in relation to finance, that's been expanded from what it currently has, so that it can now review proposals for the medium-term financial plan and the budget prior to consideration by strategy and resources policy. And for the budget, that will be all matters within the budget, so it will include any policies and matters around reserves there, as well as any proposed savings for the following year. It will be able to consider those, and that, as I say, that's in effect its pre-scrutiny work. It will also have a delegation up to £500,000 to take responsibility for decisions on commitments in future years that are not covered within the Council's medium-term financial plan. Any amounts above that will be strategy and resources, which retains the overall approval of the medium-term financial plan. And then the final one there is a bit of a tidying for something that's not really in there. It's decisions in relation to grants where they're cross-cutting or don't fall within the remit of another policy committee. It was felt that the finance committee was the appropriate place there. And then on the final page, there's the capital programme stays the same, property remains the same, and then there's a clarification that it may refer performance matters as well to other policy committees. I don't know if there's any particular questions on either the intention or the drafting as to whether it captures that intention.
Thank you, David. It's probably worth just explaining this work has come out of the bigger piece of work around committee remit reviews, which is actually the next item on the agenda, but this was identified as something that we could work on quite quickly, and there have been a couple of joint workshops with members of Finance Committee around this, so it's not only Governance Committee that has had a look at what's being proposed here. Mike.
Thanks, Chair. I'd really like to thank David and the team for pulling this together. It was clear from when the members of this committee and finance got together, there was a unanimous feeling that the finance committee needed development and needed change so it could carry out particularly its pre-scrutiny role in terms of looking at budget and MTFA, but also, interestingly, corporate performance role, looking at things like Future Sheffield, where there are targets to deliver, and the Finance Committee will clearly have a function in overviewing that to make sure that the things that are committed and funded are met. So I think this is welcome. I think it will make a big difference to the performance and running of the Finance and Performance Committee, and I look forward to approving it next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Sue?
Thank you. I mean, again, really appreciate the speed with which this has all been pulled together. I think it was really necessary, and hopefully it will improve things. I have a question. I just wondered if you could explain the difference or where the boundary is between reviewing of performance and the role of the audit committee in auditing.
So audits committee is looking much more at the processes and the procedures that the council has in place and its governance to ensure that there is a framework there for ensuring that that performance is delivered. It's not really, unless it's taken as part of an audit report, looking at individual performance matters. It's very much more about the frameworks that we have and the assurance framework and the governance that the council has to make sure that that is sufficient.
Thank you.
As well as looking at the audited accounts.
Thanks. I'm not seeing either. Mark?
It's almost a continuation from Sue's, just ensuring that there might be cases where it's actually a good thing to have two committees considering the same performance issue, but obviously there might be cases where that's just not necessary. And also just to check that this includes outside companies, agencies that are delivering services on behalf of the council.
Yes, the performance will relate to all the council's functions, whether they're delivered in-house or not.
Thanks. I'm not seeing any further questions on that, so I propose we move on to the recommendations, where I think we have already considered and commented on the proposals. So it is whether we approve the proposals and therefore agree to recommend them to full council to approve the changes to part 3.3.1 of the Constitution as set out in the appendix that David has described. Is everyone happy to approve those? Seeing nods all round, thank you very much for that, and we will be coming back to this item therefore at full council next week. So the next item is again on committee remits. This is reviewing our policy committee remits and the governance committee work plan that we have set out to look at that work. And I think here I'm looking at Jason again, looks to be preparing himself to speak.
Thank you, Chair. So the governance committee, as we mentioned, agreed to undertake a review of policy remits, policy committee remits. The finance committee is what we just discussed, which was an early piece of work on that. The purpose of bringing this item today was for us to review progress and to set out a proposed work programme for that piece of work. There are some slides which are appended to the report itself. I proposed with your agreement just to go through some of those to set out the main points and then pause at appropriate points.
Yes,
comments,
please.
if that's okay. Thank you. Next one, please. Shall I do that then? That might help. Okay, so a brief summary really of the areas of the review. There are three categories there. The first was looking at the alignment of our committees to the council's strategic ambitions. So the council plan and the council's strategic outcomes, looking at how we lead complex cross-cutting policy areas and the overall vision and where we want to go with the committee system in future. So we wanted to make sure that was considered as part of the review. And the second part was making sure the policy committees delivered their responsibilities effectively. This was partly about the balance between the type of work that the policy committees were doing, how much policy development were they doing, how many decisions were they making, how much review were they doing in that. And so we wanted to look, and we've had an initial look at that. We wanted also to look at the relative workloads of committees. If there's an imbalance, how might we address that as part of this review? We also wanted to make sure that things were being, decisions were being made at the right level and consider whether there's anything that we need to do in relation to delegations within the committee structure. And finally, the relationship between policy committees, which was the PC, and local area committees, or LACs, and the relationships between those two parts of decision making in the council at a corporate level and a local level. The final set of things there was about improving, clarifying and simplifying policy responsibilities. we've just referred to Finance Committee as being one example of that in terms of the roles of committees. Are there particular issues that we want to look at, anomalies within that? Are there gaps? Are there things that fall between multiple policy committees where things get reported to various committees, or people trying to engage in the process might find themselves not knowing where to ask a question or bring a petition, and is it very clear? So we wanted to make sure that we can address some of that as part of the review. And finally, looking at any constitutional issues and procedure rules. Let's hope this moves on. There we go, it works. Wanted to set out some of the time scales. There's a lot more detail on here. What we've done already, so April to May this year, and we've agreed a scope and developed a project plan, which we bring to you today for agreement. We've had some discussions already on particular things like the Finance Committee, and today is the day we want to sort of formally launch this as a piece of work. Then the next phase, which we're saying during the summer, is the discovery phase of work, so gathering evidence, engaging with elected members and officers, and really making sure we've got what we need to conduct the review in terms of information. Then we move in the autumn onto the development of proposals by the committee in conjunction with chairs of committees and officers. So an initial look at what proposals might be coming out of the review. Make sure we're using the leadership structures within the council to do that. And then early in 2025 to finalise proposals for implementation for next year, and making sure we share the proposals as we're going along with members, officers and other relevant stakeholders. There we go. Got the right one. I think I've got it. So in a bit more detail, so the Governance Committee has set up a task and finish group, and all members of Governance Committee are invited to attend that meeting, and we've had a couple of meetings so far. The discovery phase, as I've said, what we want to do during that is make sure we talk to members of all committees, and we're taking opportunities to do that after scheduled meetings of policy committees as part of that work. Then we're going to look at, thank you, Alan. Got a different one. The development of options. We know there might be a number of options and other iterations of this, so we really want to make this a creative process and involving people as we go along. Then the final proposal early next year for development for future submission to full council, making sure we make people aware of what the changes will be and the implementation into the new municipal year next year. I know this is the next one along. So the discovery phase is the next part we're going to go into, and this is making sure that we involve all committee members, making sure we talk to directors, probably in a workshop format or similar, schedule conversations with senior leaders in the council, and making sure we talk to committee chairs, past and present, just to make sure we capture their experience of the system as we've had it for the last 2 years, and inviting views from external stakeholders with an interest in this work as well, making sure we talk to heads of service in the council as well about options and ideas so they can have input into this. What we want to do actually is have a deep conversation with the committee chairs and the spokesperson who want them, just so we can capture that during the discovery phase. I think I've said the other things on that slide there. I wanted to pause on this slide. We've developed some questions that we want to use in talking to members and officers. and wanted any comments from members of the committee on those. There's 6 proposed questions there that the working group looked at, and wanted any comments back really to make sure we're asking about the right things, and you think the way we're asking those questions is broadly correct. So to pause there, Chair, if there's any feedback on those from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Assuming everybody's able to see those questions, do we feel they're the right questions to get the kind of answers we need to inform this work? I see we have at least one committee chair here who may be involved in being asked those questions, so it would be good to know, Dawn, if you feel that that would be a useful way of giving your input into this work.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it would, because I was also chair last year, co-chair last year, so I think we've been learning along the way, so I think I will be able to give some we knew it would be a learning curve, a learning experience as we were going along. So I think the right questions, looking at our agendas and workload, definitely is one of the things I can probably help with a response with. Thank you.
Any other comments on those? Perhaps I could, sorry, I'll come to you in a minute, Mark. Perhaps I could just mention that when we are, when you're thinking who we're talking to, that we include the Chair of Health Scrutiny in that as well. I think, again, just through conversations, I've been aware that there's potentially some areas of scrutiny that where there are gaps, and it'd be useful to have that conversation with that Chair too. Mark?
It's just a small suggestion, maybe adding, I don't know, a 1A, something like that, for those of us who are elected in 2024, to actually say, how is the process of joining this committee? Because you've not been a member of a committee before. Might come up with some interesting stuff around less the specific committee that you're on and more the concept of a committee.
Thanks. I think that's a very good point. I'm seeing no more hands, so do you want to carry it? Oh, sorry, Julie.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out where it would fit in. But I think there's something around the briefings and the scheduled meetings that we have, and how members feel that they are working, and I think how officers feel that they're working as well. Because I know a couple of weeks ago I attended a briefing. I wrote it in my diary, I can't remember. There were so many officers there, there was only me and one other member who managed to attend, and that just seems, and I know the circumstances were what the circumstances were, which is probably why that was the situation, but I do think we need to perhaps have a look at how we all feel the briefings are working. I think they're important because it makes these meetings a lot more streamlined, and we all come with a better understanding to the meetings. But I think it's just something that perhaps we need to touch base on with everyone.
Thanks, Julie. I suspect they're quite inconsistent across committees as well, which would be interesting to know about. So,
thank you. Yes, following on from that, Julian, I'm glad you raised that. I think asking a question about not just the number of meetings, but also how the briefings have worked, whether they've worked appropriately, is actually really important. I just wondered, in terms of a practical level, are you intending, or have you already invited a list of people? Because this is actually going to be quite a long list of people. So we've got 8-9 committees with a chair, deputy chair and a spokesperson. I know some of them will be the same people, but we're still looking at quite a lot of people. And I just really want to, I don't know how we can encourage buy-in for this, because I really want all those people to contribute. And I think if we find some reluctance, it might be worth sort of asking groups to encourage their members to really cooperate with this, because I think this whole process will work much, much better if all the members have some buy-in and feel it's worthwhile.
all
Chair,
good points,
if I might,
Alice.
yeah, I think if I recall, we're trying to target every committee with a pre or post session. Obviously, it will be people who are there, who are not there. I think we will try and make sure also that anyone who's not attended one of those will probably have a general mop-up session September after those more targeted ones. And I take your point about groups. I think we've had that conversation about actually is this another split that we should look at going directly to the groups as well. So I feel if we start with the committees, but then we'll make sure we do, you know, we've got a list of who we haven't heard from. But if you feel actually we should do it another way, groups sooner rather than later, then that's fine as well. So over to you.
So I don't think that wasn't quite what I meant. I mean, I'm not saying that wouldn't be useful. I think I was more thinking, you know, feedback to the groups if you think you're not getting buy-in, so we can use our influence within the groups to say, you know, please go along to this, please do it, to sort of get people to engage.
Seeing lots of nods at that suggestion, I think. So, yes, please do encourage us to encourage our groups to participate. Any further questions on this? Do you want to carry on, Jason, with where you were up to?
Thanks, Chair. And I think we can use the task and finish group we'll check in with you about how we are doing in terms of the engagement, and if we do find there are gaps, I think we can follow up some of the points that have been raised in that. So that'd be really useful. Thank you. Last couple of slides. So this was a bit more about the option development phase. Similar sort of approach, really. Making sure we're talking to the chairs and the relevant officers and the strategic leadership structures within the council, making sure we're also speaking with the stakeholders as part of that. And really what we do need to do is pause and think at what stages would it be appropriate to do that as well. So that's something we can consider as the task and finish group as we move through the work, and we perhaps find out what's coming out of the review. Importantly, a legal test of the options to make sure they're workable in terms of the constitution, in terms of wider legal framework as well, and then some kind of testing of options with real genders to make sure they work in a real life scenario. So we do something around those as well, and then once we've done all that, we'll review all those options, then come up with a set of preferred options for consideration and wider discussion. Then the final proposal, as I say, for implementation in 25-26 municipal year. We'd shared proposals with stakeholders, including obviously members and officers, and take the proposal to full council as a recommendation of the work done by the governance committee, and then develop an implementation and roadmap, and do a final legal test, an awareness raising session before it's all implemented and taken to full council for approval from there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So I think the end result there is an aim to take these to next May's AGM so that any changes to the committee system are in place for next municipal year, effectively. If I can just again add one further point there, I think we have discussed within the working group to what extent this is of interest to external stakeholders. I think it's probably limited to some extent. It's not something that I would see as doing a massive wide consultation around, but I think we do also know that we do have some external stakeholders who are really specifically interested in this, and it would be good to reach out to them quite early on in that discovery phase to understand how they would like to be involved in it, even if we're not looking at some kind of massive citywide consultation. There's obviously groups who I know watch this committee quite regularly and are interested in these subjects. So, any further points anyone wanted to make on the other phases of this timescale? No. Okay. In that case, I think the proposal here is basically to agree this work plan and agree these timescales, and if everybody is happy with those, yes, that's all good. Thank you very much for your work on this, Jason. We'll continue coming back to this at future committee meetings. Okay, so we're moving on to item 10, which is the Community Engagement Update Report. And I think Alice, you're going to lead us off on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start by sort of picking out the point that actually we've labelled this up as community engagement. I think it's really important that you do that because it's now puts it in the same space of lots of other things that are happening concurrently, if you like, in the organisation. So it actually adds, for me, emphasis to the work of this committee rather than kind of feeling like it's a sideline. It's a very core piece of work. And I think it's important to, then I will just sort of chat through, if you like, what we were trying to show you here today in this report is some progress to date, which you're aware of if you're a member of the previous committee, but also an update on some of the activity that is going on, and to encourage you to then also, from a very practical point of view, look at the next steps and let us know what you want to see and who you want to be involved. So I think if I sort of quickly whiz through it's page 4 of the document, because everything was published a bit separately, wasn't it? I'm all right for a minute. And what community engagement is very much about, together we get things done. So it has a very strong place in our new council plan, which is very much about making sure that we do engage and that we want to develop a new comprehensive vision and approach to engaging citizens. So it's really got a strong emphasis in the new council plan, where we talk about a new approach to community empowerment and engagement, working with our voluntary community and faith sector partners and through the LACs. There's a reference as well about the Future Sheffield programme, which is about a strong and consistent approach to engagement for the organisation in terms of making a success of the customer experience element of Future Sheffield work. I think what's fair to say is the governance committee, the working group was set up as much a response to the Involve report, and you are taking a lead role in working with stakeholders to try and harness expertise in the city to set out a long-term vision and plan, and that was one of the two recommendations of that Involve report. And all this will then, in turn, what the work you do to help grow and enhance the approach to engagement across the whole council. I think what I want to share with you and draw to your attention is that it's also now about getting the basics right as an organisation. To that end, there will be a set of foundations for good engagement that will be proposed to S&R in July, and creating this clear statement of expectations. So we can't sort of sit on our laurels. We need to be getting some basics right now, but that this is all part of a journey, and the paper to S&R is going to recognise this, that it's a journey as an organisation, and we want to be as excellent as we can now and in the medium term, but that the work of governance committee, the leadership are showing in terms of developing that vision is absolutely crucial to this, particularly the collaborative cross-party working group. So that's trying to put a bit of context to those few paragraphs that are in section 1. Next steps really for me are very much about the working group. We need a bit of a refresh on the membership of the working group, because in this municipal year we've lost a few, gained a few members, so I think it's really important. Recognising the intention that the working group is that it does operate collaboratively, wants to bring in external voices and co-produce that piece of work to develop a vision for engagement, which will then grow and enhance our current engagement practice. So in a very practical sense, you establish the working group with cross-party representation, and absolutely now want to confirm who from each of the political groups are actually going to be part of this working group. We had a conversation previously that, and it's there in one of the earlier reports, this isn't exclusively nominations from the membership of this committee. It's to make sure that there's a broad representation, and just it then, in a very practical way for me as an officer supporting that group, knows who I need to get in touch with to make things happen. So please do let me know what those are, have that conversation. And then the other thing that we're really asking you to consider is there's been talk of, when the working groups met previously, about having a community engagement conference, for want of a different phrase, and it's about getting that off the ground. And it was very much suggested that not only does that conference absolutely include elected members and officers, stakeholders, community organisations and partners, and I would like to see that happen fairly soon, and I'm sure you as members of the committee would. One suggestion, if you're up for it, is that actually we use the time schedule for Governance Committee in September to hold that conference. That, of course, puts us in a position where we're going to have to do some pretty rapid planning activity. And to help with that, I would really appreciate sort of nominations, if you like, volunteers for a small planning group from this committee, and we will also, I think, extend that to officers and stakeholders, and I'm happy, or we as officers are happy to be steered on who you would like, because I think the focus here is ensuring there is a clear purpose approach, and we know that there's a very inclusive invite list. One final thing just to emphasise, that a lot of this is about very much responding also to our equalities duties, if you like, under the Equalities Act, to make sure that we know for sure who is participating and involved, and encouraging the participation and involvement that we need across the city, across our citizens, and that we make sure that that engagement happens in the right way, so that all the right people can be involved. So it's making sure that we are inclusive, and I think this working group is one way to start that. So really that's my ask of this committee.
Thank you, Alice. So there's a number of specifics there that we will ask people to comment on when we get to the final recommendations in terms of membership of the group. But in terms of general comments or feedback on that, I saw Dawn first and then Paul.
Thank you, Chair. This is a really key piece of work. I appreciate that, because it has always been, and should have always been, about collaboration, empowerment, and Alice, you know my thoughts on this. But what I want to know is what is going to be different then? Because if we are going to ask stakeholders back into a conference, a summit, or whatever we want to call it, to discuss this again, when we've been having conversations with communities and voluntary sector and stakeholders about collaboration and partnership and co-design, co-delivery, co-production for years, what is it this time that we're going to do that's different, which will make people want to come to a stakeholder meeting?
If I might, Chair, I think one of the things for me, and you can tell me, Councillor Dale, if I've got this wrong, is that this is very much about an end product around a vision that is properly co-produced. And I don't know whether all the stakeholders, particularly ones that you work with and the people you've been involved with, really feel that that's what's happened. And I think the Chair as well will emphasise that this is about the coming together, and we need to get that right. And when I say, can we have a planning group, I think I'm very much looking to members of this committee to help make that right. So to actually, for us to help you answer that question, if that makes sense, so that if you're saying to me that this needs to show something different, and these people need to know why they're coming and what they're going to get out of it, and actually are they going to see a change, then it would be really useful to have that input from yourselves to make this happen, which I think probably suggests that the 5th of September might be too soon. But it's that balance of not too late, not too soon. But, you know, I look to yourselves to really help make sure that we get I don't like the word conference, but I wasn't quite sure what else to use. We get something like that, a stakeholder event, shows that there's something different, and that people are really being encouraged as part of the city to co-produce this vision.
Thanks. If I can just follow up on that as well, we've already kind of reached out to a number of people who are really, really interested in this space, external people who, and I think, you know, hopefully we need to work with them on whether this date will work for them to begin with, but we can also work with at least some of them to actually plan this event as well, to make sure it is co-created from the start. do you want to come back in, Dawn, and then I'll come
Yeah,
to
if I
other
can
people
please,
as well.
just to give an example, when we went through the transition to the committee system, we spoke about how this was all about citizen participation through the committee system. And I think I've found it really difficult in children's to be able to get people in the room from different, so alternative providers who provide provision for us, or parents or young people. It's so when we talk about participation with the local authority, will this help us to be able to kind of put in a framework where we can work at a committee level with citizens of Sheffield to help us shape policy, such as things like alternative provision, education, children's services, health, or whatever. So I'm trying to, because I'm a sub, I'm sorry, I don't really know a lot of conversations that you've already had over the last couple of years, but is that what this is going to help us to be able to navigate through as part of the committee system, so that we can bring in citizen expertise?
I'd like to just say yes, otherwise we've got we've got it wrong. And that's why, you know, as an officer, I'm looking to that sort of input. And I hear what you're saying completely, and I feel that that's about, that could be, you know, that feels like we're moving into possibly one of the core elements of a vision, you know, that it's exactly that. So yes, and I guess the answer to that is, if you feel as elected members that's not been achieved, then we've not got it right.
Thank you.
Paul?
Thanks. So a couple of things then. Firstly, I'm just wondering, so I see that you've noted the customer experience strategy, and I'm just wondering how these two things, when completed, will work together, because it feels like there's commonalities, you know, and so will the scope of this, this is not just for how people come and scrutinise us, or, you know, come to these formal meetings, is it? And I know that there's still issues with people accessing customer services, you know, and I'm sure members like me will have had reports of essentially our constituents been treated with disdain by officers sometimes, and so I would like to make sure that we cover things like that as well, you know, and it's not just we're going to go and do some new thing and we want the community to co-produce it with us. It's every interaction that people have, and secondly, so not every, you know, the council is run by people, and people are different, and the different departments are different as well, and there's, you know, there's cultures within the culture of the council, if that makes sense, and I think fairly often when there's community engagement in it, a sense of co-production of something, it's kind of used to validate the project, but then not actually taking those views through into the project, and so I wonder, will there also be something in it about how we embed that and then enforce that culture that, you know, if you go and ask a local expert, that you then, you know, what they say steers the project, the thing. Sorry, was that a really awkward way to say that?
No, that's all right. I think James is going to give a lot more information around how customer experience fits with this. One thing I want to say was, this is about the vision. So this is everyone coming together, the governance committee, the working group, public involvement working group, leading on what that vision should look like, what should be in it. So those are valid points, but I think in terms of customer experience, I'll hand over to you, James.
Thank you. Yes, so thank you, Councillor Turpin. So on the customer experience point, the customer experience strategy explicitly acknowledges the importance of community involvement and participation as a sort of cornerstone or foundation of getting our customer experience right. Because as you rightly say, every interaction that a member of the public has with the council shapes their experience of what the organisation is like, but also that community engagement can't be separated from that experience of receiving a service or an interaction with an officer in a park or with housing or wherever it might be. So there is a real interplay between those two things, and the teams that, from an officer point of view, that are working on customer experience and community engagement have absolutely recognised the need to sort of work hand in glove around those two pieces of work, because otherwise there is a risk, as I think you're sort of highlighting, that they might go off in slightly different directions, which is what we want to try to avoid. So both the customer experience paper and then that piece of work that Alice has highlighted around those foundations for community engagement are on the same S&R agenda, so that we can draw those links together between those two things. So hopefully that just gives a little reassurance that we are thinking about that. And then just in terms of your the second part of your question around the culture of the organisation and actually valuing the views and perspectives that different people might give us through the engagement work that we're doing. For me, that's fundamental to this piece of work, actually, that if that cultural, the cultural issues that we've had, and I think we know that, those have been set out in a number of different reports, if they're not at the heart of how we are thinking about what we need to change, then we've probably got something wrong. So that is about being in a space, and this is the work that the committee will want to do, is to think about how do we make sure that as we are asking people for their views, that not only are we asking for those views, but that we're hearing them and that we're listening to them. And that's kind of at the heart of what this is about for me, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps just to add, I think some of the work that's in the Involve report about that ladder of participation talks about the different levels of involvement, depending on what kind of decisions we're talking about or what kind of service we're talking about and what is appropriate. And if we're coming to some developing a framework around which we can decide at what level we need to involve people, but not just because that's convenient for officers, but because it's the appropriate level in order to make good decisions and provide good services. And I think that will also be should be the output of this work as well. I'll move on to Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was actually going to mention the Involve report because I do think that is really important, and I think, you know, we did put a lot of work into getting that done, so I think that needs to form the basis for whatever we decide to do. But I think certainly the council has moved on some from then, and I think really whoever is on the working group, we need to make sure that we are taking cognizance of the other big pieces of work that we've done in the council, you know, the local plan that you know, the Sheffield plan that we've now got, so that we can make sure that everything is interlinked and fits in, so that the engagement is across the whole piece. So I think it's important that we're not just looking at the Involve report and what we're doing as governance, but we've got a really high level strategic view of what's going on in the council to make sure that the engagement does fit. And I think you're right, the Involve report should play quite an important part in doing that. So I think you may be right, Alice, September, in terms of getting everything properly in a row, because, you know, Sheffield were very clear to us that they want to be engaged in what we do as a council, and, you know, we sort of a couple of years in now and we're still grappling with how we get this right. So I think, you know, this is the opportunity now to make sure that we actually do finally get it right, and we've got something that, you know, works for the people in the city and works for us as a council, to make sure that we've got everything working as they've asked us to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, did you have a point?
Thank you. Yeah, just a few points, hopefully connected. I mean, I think the first one is just drawing out, the Involve report does this, but I think there's two framing. It's the level of involvement that people want, deep, shallow. That's one way of looking at it. I think another way is looking at it, in what capacity are residents wanting to engage? I mean, if I think of two examples, I don't really care my role as a citizen when the bin is being emptied. I just want the bin to be emptied. I'm a customer. But actually, if I'm engaging in another element of the council, I might be engaging as a citizen. And I think the customer-citizen dichotomy is quite an interesting one. We're using the language of customer all the time here. I'm not always certain that's accurate. It might be accurate for some parts of residents' engagement with the council, not with others. And I think that would feed into the fact that there are plenty of outside organisations that deliver services for our residents on our behalf, but they aren't us. And they've got to be part of this as well. There's no point if we're treating people with respect as citizens or customers if organisations that are outside of us aren't. And then a third point is how this interfaces with the LACs, and making sure that what we're not doing is adopting a fairly old-fashioned model of just saying, right, we'll listen to you, we'll genuinely listen to you, we'll hear what you want to do, and then we'll do it. Because that's not what I would see this as being about, because that's not reaching out to people and listening and engaging with them as they want to be engaged with, as opposed to just us doing what works for us. And it's slightly better than a fig leaf, but not much better.
Thank you. I think I'd agree with all of that, and I think it's why, this is not just about a customer services. The experience is the work we're doing elsewhere, but looking much wider in terms of how citizens can influence policy and how we go forward as a city. And I've cited often the work around the city goals as a really good example of how we've engaged people right across the spectrum in Sheffield to look at where we want to be as a city and really co-design our future, if you like. And I think it's very much that model that we want to look at, but recognising there will be all kinds of different level of involvement with this work. I think I'd be quite keen that I think the external people that we've started to involve with this work, I think all bring that kind of expertise as well, and will bring a lot of experience from different parts of the country, from different types of organisation. There is some fantastic work going on in different councils up and down the country, but also in other places. And I think by drawing that expertise together, I think that's a good, that will be incredibly helpful in the co-creation of this. I think my personal preference, I accept that it's quite a short time scale to draw an event together in September, but what I'd say is that isn't going to be the be-all and end-all of this work, this event. It's really about a starting point of bringing different people together, and maybe a conference perhaps is overselling it, and something like a workshop where we're bringing some of those external people alongside officers, members, and some of our community organisations as well, I think probably is achievable. And that's what I'd like to see us making some progress towards and putting some concrete steps in, really, so that we are getting the next steps in place. I understand this will be a lengthy piece of work, but I think we need to start putting in some milestones and time scales in order to progress it and work out where we want to be on it, if people are happy with that approach. I've not got any other hands up at the moment. Looking at the recommendations here, see if I find the right piece of paper. They're to note the ongoing progress of the Council's approach to community engagement. Coming on to the third one, which is to consider the proposed public involvement conference / workshop, etc. Are people happy to at least aim for September? I think we need to work with people outside to find out if that date really will work, but if people are happy to at least attempt to work towards that. Seeing nods generally there, yep. And then agreeing the refreshed membership for the working group for the forthcoming municipal year. I don't know if groups are in a position to do that now, Sue?
Yes, which is really good. So we have 3 members on the group, and Councillor Williams and Councillor Clement Jones are happy to continue, which is good news from my perspective. And obviously Councillor Ian Auckland isn't here, but he will be replaced by Councillor Rebecca Atkinson.
Thank you. From Labour, I confirm our membership will continue to be myself and Councillor Ben Miskell, but we will also include Councillor Eldodd in place of Laura Moynihan. Paul?
Myself and Brian Holmeshaw for the Greens.
Thanks. And Julia,
Yeah, I'm going to replace Diane.
that's great. So I think we've got the membership of the committee sorted out, and if there are volunteers amongst that group to help with the planning of this event, I'll suggest we come back to you afterwards on that, so you've got the chance to ask amongst your members on the group, if that's okay. Okay. So I think we've considered all those recommendations then, so thank you on that item. Anything outstanding on that item anyone wanted to raise? Okay. In that case, we will move on to item 11, the work programme, which is, again, yourself, Alice.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm just trying to rapidly find it. Essentially, it's your first work programme of this municipal year, and what we've tried to do is there are recommendations, some of it is fairly standard work programme report language. I think the main information really for you to look at is page 4, which is the appendix 1, which actually lists your topics. I just want to draw attention to the fact, if I can, that there are 2 pretty substantive items, both of which you've discussed and considered today, and that if you want, they will definitely have an impact on your capacity and the capacity to get some outcomes on them, and do have an implication for prioritisation of any remaining items that might be on the work programme from last year, or any additions that you wish to consider. So I think I just say that in bearing in mind what's on there. And if you look at what's on there, actually the 2 main items are there: community engagement and reviewing our policy committee remits. There's a couple of others on there: urgent decisions. That was something that was reviewed last year, but it was agreed that there'd be an annual report on activity. I don't think we've quite nailed down exactly when that will be, but it's possible David can shed a bit more light on that one, or Jason. That the charity, we've agreed, haven't we, that the charity subcommittee and our role as a charitable trustee will actually be included in the Remits work. So that's kind of been agreed subsequent to the paper before you, so we just need to make sure we weave that in. After that, there were 3 that were there from last year that I think still have some resonance, but again, it's about considering when you might want to look at those. One is measuring the health of the committee system. I feel personally that perhaps that is something a bit further down the line, once we actually know where you've gone to in terms of remits, but also so we're clear with our new performance framework and how some of those fit in with that. And the changes to delegations, that's sort of sitting around. Again, I'm hoping David can say something around that one. And then the update on the GRIP for those who need a refresh, which I did, is the governance review implementation plan from the governance review that was actually carried out at least 18 months ago, I think now, if not longer. And it's working out how much value for you as a committee to know what's happening with the details in that. And I wonder if, again, it's a bit like the urgent decisions. We'll bring you an updated report, but we won't necessarily make it a every meeting report unless that's what you want. So I'm just conscious of your workload as much as anyone's.
Thank you. David, do you want to comment on the urgent decisions and delegations items?
Urgent decisions, we have very few. I think we brought the last review relatively recently. Yeah, I would suggest that we've forecasted for another year after we last brought it, because it's not being an issue. So, I mean, we can always review that if we find that there are more. So we'll keep it under review. But can I suggest we program it for a year after last time? I think the delegations might need to be picked up in with the remits, because I think that's probably part and parcel of that, and I think rather than separating it out, I think if we're looking at the remits, that ought to be the level of delegations as well, and where the line between officer and member decisions sit. So I think that's probably worth picking that up as part of that. You'd also mentioned the charity stuff. We're doing some work on that, and actually I was away this morning further looking at that. So there is some legal advice coming through, but I can't see us being in a position to do anything on that until the very end of the year or into the new year.
Thanks, David. I think I'd agree with all those suggestions, and also with what you suggested there, Alice, about measuring the health of the committee system. There's probably a lot of useful things happening this year that can inform that work. Is everyone happy with those suggestions? Some of those will be coming towards the end of the year, basically, or at least an update on those towards the end of the year. And the urgent decisions will be probably again towards the end of the year. If it's about a year, we'll look at when we last discussed it and then bring it on. Mike?
Yeah, just on urgent decisions, we have had so few. I think towards the end of the year, or maybe halfway through, we should be looking at the process and saying, well, do we need to set up an urgent decision committee for every single policy committee if we're not getting them through, and see if we can do it differently?
That might be useful ahead of our, any changes that we make in May. I suppose we might want to think about whether we need to make those changes then, so we could come to that towards the end of this year.
Yes, as soon as you don't have one will arise. But I suppose the view is, do you have an urgency committee that's cross-cutting, rather than establish them for each individual? I suppose that is something we can look at.
So, did you have a comment there as well?
Not particularly. I was just going to agree with most of what had been said. Actually, we discussed the urgency decisions. They're in the minutes that we approved at the beginning of this meeting. So that's when it was. No, I was just going to say I think we need to focus on the two big items. And unless anything else arises that we need to deal with semi-urgently, then I think we should just stick with those and concentrate our efforts.
I'd be happy with that as well, and I think given that one of the things we've talked about is actually having fewer committee meetings and more workshop style activities in order to progress that work, then perhaps we could keep the grip on as a regular item, because actually we might find that's still only coming up every couple of months or something like that. So, and it's just a means of checking that if people would be happy with that. So it means we'd be looking at it every two to 3 months, which feels about appropriate, probably. If everybody is happy with those recommendations, then I don't think anyone's proposed additions or amendments other than what we've just said about urgent decisions. Then again, I'm just in agreement for those recommendations on this item. Thank you. That just leaves the final item, which is the date of the next meeting. As we've just discussed, we may replace that with the workshop, but in either case, that is scheduled for the morning of 5th of September 2024. Thanks, everybody, for your time this afternoon.